There's a reason so many people switch off when they hear Middle Ages. The moment conjures the same tired image: mud, disease, unwashed bodies, and a level of filth we assume modern life has long surpassed. But that picture collapses the moment you look closer. Because beneath the rough wool, behind the grim depictions in art and film, there was a system, deliberate, effective, surprisingly advanced, that kept people cleaner than we've been led to believe. And it wasn't built on frequent bathing or luxury. It was built on something far more practical: fabric. Not just any fabric, but linen worn directly against the skin. If you stay with this idea for a moment, it begins to shift everything, because this wasn't a minor detail of medieval life. It was a daily survival strategy, unrefined over generations in a world where hygiene could mean the difference between life and death. And what makes it even more compelling is that much of this knowledge has quietly disappeared, replaced by modern materials that promise convenience but often fail where it matters most. So instead of dismissing the past, it's worth asking a different question. What did they understand that we've forgotten? The popular image of medieval life didn't emerge by accident. It was shaped centuries later, especially during the Renaissance and Enlightenment. When earlier periods were deliberately portrayed as backward, over time that narrative hardened into something people rarely question. But historical records tell a more complicated story. Bathhouses existed across Europe, sometimes regulated by local authorities. Clothing inventories, wills, and household accounts repeatedly reference linen garments in large quantities. These weren't decorative items, they were functional essentials. The key detail is this: people didn't rely on washing their bodies as often as we do today. Instead, they relied on washing what sat directly on the body. Linen undergarments absorbed sweat, oils, and dirt throughout the day. At night or at intervals, those garments were removed and cleaned, scrubbed, rinsed, sometimes boiled. The result was a rotating system of cleanliness. The skin stayed relatively protected, and the dirtiest layer was the easiest to clean. In a world without modern plumbing, that was not just efficient, it was necessary, and it worked. What medieval people discovered through experience, we can now explain through material science. Linen fibers come from the flax plant, and under magnification, they reveal a structure very different from many modern textiles. Each fiber contains microscopic channels that allow it to absorb moisture quickly and release it just as efficiently. This means sweat doesn't sit on the skin. It gets pulled away, dispersed, and evaporated. Even during heavy labor, the body remains comparatively dry. That alone would make linen useful. But there's more. Flax contains natural compounds that inhibit bacterial growth. This isn't a marketing claim or modern innovation. It's a property built into the plant itself. When linen is used to wrap wounds or worn close to the skin, it creates a less hospitable environment for the microbes that cause odor and infection. Historical medical texts, while lacking modern terminology, repeatedly note that certain fabrics keep wounds clean or prevent corruption. Linen appears again and again in those descriptions. And then there's airflow. Linen fibers are stiff compared to softer materials like cotton. That stiffness prevents the fabric from clinging tightly to the body, allowing a thin layer of air to circulate between cloth and skin. In hot conditions, that airflow helps regulate temperature. In cooler conditions, it contributes to insulation when layered correctly. Put all of this together, and you get a material that manages moisture, limits bacterial growth, and stabilizes body temperature. All without any chemical treatment or synthetic engineering. One of the biggest misconceptions about historical clothing is that it was crude or inefficient. In reality, it followed principles that modern outdoor survival experts still emphasize, though often without recognizing their origins. The system was simple. Linen went directly against the skin. Wool or heavier fabrics went on top. This combination solved a problem that continues to challenge people today: how to stay warm without becoming dangerously damp. The human body produces moisture even in cold environments. Movement, stress, and basic metabolism generate sweat. If that moisture stays close to the skin, it becomes a liability. Wet fabric conducts heat away from the body far faster than dry fabric. In cold conditions, that can accelerate the onset of hypothermia. Linen acted as the first line of defense. It absorbed moisture quickly and pulled it away from the skin. The outer wool layer provided insulation, trapping warm air without becoming saturated as quickly. Because the linen handled the moisture, the wool could do its job effectively. This wasn't theoretical. It was tested daily by soldiers, laborers, and travelers moving through harsh environments. It allowed them to remain active without accumulating the kind of dampness that leads to rapid heat loss. Modern synthetic base layers attempt to replicate this effect, often with mixed results. But the underlying principle remains unchanged. Keep the skin dry. Manage moisture. Layer intelligently. Medieval people were doing exactly that. If linen was so effective, why did it fall out of favor? The answer lies in industrialization. As textile production became mechanized, materials that were easier and cheaper to process gained dominance. Cotton, in particular, surged after innovations made it faster to clean and spin. Later, synthetic fibers entered the market, offering even greater speed and flexibility in manufacturing. These materials weren't adopted because they were superior in every way. They were adopted because they were scalable. They could be produced in massive quantities, dyed easily, and sold at lower prices. Over time, convenience reshaped perception. What was once standard became niche. Linen, with its more labor-intensive production, was gradually reframed as a luxury rather than a practical necessity. At the same time, synthetic fibers introduced new variables. They resist wrinkling, hold color well, and are lightweight. But many also trap moisture, retain odor, and degrade in ways that release microscopic particles into the environment. The trade-off wasn't always obvious at first. But as awareness grows around issues like skin irritation, overheating, and environmental impact, the limitations of these materials are becoming harder to ignore. This isn't about romanticizing the past or rejecting modern technology outright. It's about recognizing when older solutions still outperform newer ones in specific areas. If you look at where linen was most effective historically, a pattern emerges. It was always used closest to the body. That's where its properties matter most. Reintroducing it doesn't require a complete wardrobe overhaul. It starts with the layers that interact directly with your skin. Undergarments, shirts, and sleepwear are the most logical places to begin. These are the areas where moisture management, breathability, and antibacterial properties have the greatest impact. Over time, the benefits become noticeable. Less odor buildup, more consistent temperature regulation, greater comfort during long periods of activity or rest. There's also durability to consider. Linen fibers are strong. With proper care, garments can last for years, often improving in texture as they age. This contrasts with many modern fabrics that degrade quickly, losing structure and performance after repeated use. And then there's the broader perspective. Choosing materials that align with long-term function rather than short-term convenience shifts how you think about consumption. It encourages fewer, better items instead of constant replacement. That mindset isn't new. It's exactly how people approached clothing when resources were limited and survival depended on reliability. The deeper you look into historical practices, the more you see a pattern of practical decision-making shaped by necessity. People didn't choose materials based on branding or trends. They chose what worked, what lasted, and what could be maintained with the tools available. Linen fit that requirement. It could be washed aggressively without losing integrity. It performed consistently across seasons. It supported hygiene in environments where other options were limited. Those qualities haven't changed. What has changed is the context in which we make decisions. Modern life offers an overwhelming number of choices, many of them optimized for cost or appearance rather than performance. In that environment, it's easy to overlook materials that don't fit current trends, but still deliver exceptional results. Looking back isn't about rejecting progress. It's about filtering it, keeping what works, questioning what doesn't, and recognizing that some solutions were refined over centuries for a reason. There's a tendency to think of history as a linear progression, where each generation improves on the last. But that's not always how it works. Sometimes knowledge is lost, not because it was flawed, but because it was replaced by something easier to produce or distribute. Linen is one example of that pattern. It represents a broader category of solutions that were quietly effective, deeply practical, and gradually sidelined. Rediscovering those solutions isn't about going backward. It's about recovering options that still have value. And in a world where comfort, health, and environmental impact are becoming increasingly important, those options are worth reconsidering. If you found this breakdown useful and want more content that digs into real historical survival strategies, you can actually apply. Make sure you subscribe and share this with someone who still believes the Middle Ages were just chaos and filth. There's a lot more hidden beneath the surface. Once you start seeing it, you don't look at history the same way again.